Good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for coming. I'll call to order the Wednesday, February 8th, 2023 meeting of the Neenah Finance Committee. We're at the meeting here live in the Great Plain Room and also on Zoom. And I know Barry's coming late, but we have a quorum, and so why don't we begin? As our first item is, are there any citizens either in the room or on the screen who want to address the Finance Committee? Nobody online. No one online. Okay, we'll move on from that then to minutes from our last meeting from last Wednesday. Louise was kind enough to get them out in the usual punctual and comprehensive way, so thank you. Do people have a chance to review, and if so, do they feel ready to take action on it?
Second.
So, the minutes are moved for approval by Josh and seconded by Dick. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll come to a vote. There's no one on the screen yet, so we'll just come around the room. Jim?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so those are approved. Okay, so we'll now come to, now that we've concluded our budget hearings with the various departments, which we've spent doing over the last from December, then through this month. Now we're going to talk about the budget and with the goal being to see if we can come up with a draft budget for us to vote on tonight, so that we can begin the process of presenting it to the town manager and getting the various paperwork and other things we need to do. So I think the best way to do it, and Louise did the spreadsheets that we've had in the past, was sort of do it in the line that it'll be in the town meeting warrant, which is to start with townwide expenses and then work our way through the various departments. That makes sense to people? People comfortable doing it that way? Yeah. So what I'm gonna do then is for each category, I'll call it out. And to see if people have discussions on a specific amount that is in the town manager's recommended budget, and if there's any changes or questions in that we want to do as a finance committee. So the first one is for general insurance, which would be casualty, liability, property, self-insurance. The amount in the recommended budget from the town manager is $922,490. All right. So unless I hear something, I'm gonna deem that approved, okay? Okay, next one is debt service within the levy in the amount of $17,543,250. You'll note that amount is less than last year, only because some of the bonds are being paid off, particularly some of the older projects, and no new ones came on. So as a result of that, it's a lesser amount than in past years.
For excluded debt.
For excluded debt. I'm sorry, debt service within the levy.
This is not debt service within the levy. It's all debt service.
It's all three, yeah.
Yeah,
But the one that's coming down is excluded debt.
Right.
correct. Like 2.7.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, then the next one is group health insurance and benefits, $17,599,022.
Let me just say a few words on that. The base number, as you know, was 17,740, 17,3. If you included all of DSL4, you're up to 17,7. What this reflects is an increase in hours for the community housing specialist and the new positions with the school department caused an increase of about just under 274,000 to get us up to the number that is recommended here.
I would suggest we pass on that
Mhm.
until we pass on those items.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Electric, light and gas, $5,655,057. OPEB, $8,199,280.
Same issue there, We increased roughly $58,000 for the new positions.
So I have another question. So are we charging OPEB to enterprise funds and revolving funds too?
Yes, they do, pay, a share. to-
As if it were,
It's an indirect cost,
as if it were a benefit?
yes. The actuary actually calculates what the
Mhm.
shares of the sewer and water enterprise funds are.
But I think they isn't the OPEB, this amount is not because of new positions.
According to
Yeah.
Dave,
Yeah,
yes.
the supplemental,
DSO.
increase in the, budget. is-
Once, if they're hired, then it becomes a liability.
But aren't we charging this according to an actuarial analysis? Isn't that what the amount is that we're putting into this fund?
Yes, but.
And that doesn't change next year, right?
Well, it would change this once we have the new data and the new head count.
But that's next year.
But our practice has been that if we add head count. We
Okay.
incorporate the cost. In the case of the school department. You don't have as close of a percentage taking health insurance and such, so it's a blended rate of 60% of the workforce
At post-retirement.
at post-retirement.
All right, we'll hold off on that one, just because when we go through the open positions that are being
Mhm.
requested in various departments. Retirement assessments, 12,319,665. You there. Workers' compensation, 779,255.
Same issue here, 7,400.
Well, there's more than that with respect to the workers' compensation. I think one of the questions is, don't we have a certain target amount that we want to have in reserve for each one of those? So I remember a couple of years ago, we had a substantial, and I think it was a free cash appropriation at town meeting
Into the reserve.
into the reserve for workers' comp. And so the question is that what we're doing again here?
No, this is their estimated cost of combination of the stop loss insurance, indemnity, cost, legal defense and medical supplies. And then, what isn't expended is, into the reserve to pay the future costs that may be associated with the workers' comp claim from this year.
So Dave, just following up on that, so obviously there's a big jump from last year to
Mhm.
this year in this.
I think that might be a typo.
Last year was a typo?
No, what the one on the sheet from last year, the budget book I had from last year is 732,000.
No, that's for injured on duty in 111.
Yeah, I think they've been.
They've
transposed.
transposed. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what that is.
okay.
I can't approve that.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Leading to confusion.
All right, there we go.
Okay.
Oh, Dave changed the order and I didn't. I think the orders changed from last year on those, but anyway, sorry.
The old cut and paste.
Yeah, it's just that first column.
I know I did the wrong.
The first column is the one that's
A
on,
little
the
short,
first,
cut and
yeah,
paste.
first column is
It's just the
correct.
first column. Tom.
So it's not like,
Just the name,
the
right,
amount
yeah.
is pretty much in line with last year, it's just, the true amount is, it's in the 700s. Not 151.
Right, which
last year.
didn't make
And
any
I'm
sense.
50
in terms of-
down.
All right,
And that, is there an allocation in there, David, for new employees too?
Yes,
Okay, so we'll hold that one then. And then injured on duty and 111 F expenses. 159,415. That's the transposure.
mhm.
That doesn't affect any new employees.
Correct.
So everyone said there. Classification, performance and settlements. 998,000 Again, that's pending positions, pending new
Pending,
positions.
pending
Negotiation.
negotiation, right. All the raises that have yet to be approved, correct?
yes.
Anyone have an issue there? and then the reserve fund, so as we talked about last week, the formulaic amount is the 2,346,825. Louise says there were two items that we're gonna be correcting on the department side to correct an error in the library, to add a certain amount of dollars, and then to reflect the change in the minimum assessment, which actually come down a little bit. So the net of those two would result, in order to fund those two, would require taking 3,288 from the formula amount of 2,346,825. I'm in agreement with that, but I also think that I would propose that we level fund the reserve fund. And use the same amount as we're using for fiscal year 23. 2,052,091. We haven't been expending it, and it doesn't seem to be that there's a need to carry that much. What do people think?
Is there any appetite to, start moving some money into that, debt stabilization fund?
So can I address that? I believe that,
Well, I think you can ask him.
may I address
You
that?
can.
The debt service stabilization fund is not going to help with future excluded debt projects.
Correct.
That fund is for additional debt service within the levy.
So addresses partly addresses the 3%, not the 1%.
Didn't we receive a report that said that we are gonna be exceeding
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yes,
That's if, so I think that requires a little bit more discussion regarding that capital.
I don't think that mitigates the discussions we want to have. It just gives us it gives us a little more flexibility. Necessarily why.
Right, so we can decide later where we wanna move it to. We don't have to decide today.
Well, there need to be a warrant article to move it. That we would have to propose or have to ask for it to be proposed.
Do we have a debt service stabilization fund warrant article already? We'll just have we'll have a placeholder. Warrant article.
And what's the overage and where does it go?
Okay, so the overage potentially, if we level funded from last year, the reserve fund, which is the money we hold back to pay for snow and ice and any other unexpected or other thing. If we level funded, that would free up, I'll use that expression, about $350,000. So the question on that 350 is whether we don't ask for it to be raised through the tax levy. So in other words, the overall budget will be $350,000 less that has to be appropriated through taxes, or we decide and agree to appropriate that somewhere else, such as Jim's advocating for this debt stabilization fund, which is a fund that's in place to, in the future, when we're gonna run up and over debt limits, to have money available to, in that year, when that happens, to address that. So I think that's one of the things, but that's not the only place the money could go to if we wanted to appropriate it, as opposed to just not having it be appropriated. Does that make sense?
But if it's in the reserve fund,
It's in the reserve fund.
if it's in the reserve, if it stays in the reserve fund. And if at the end of the fiscal year, there is no expenditure within the reserve fund, what happens to those monies at that time?
It goes to free cash.
Free cash.
Okay, so I think there is an important distinction to be made, whether the money should be reserved for these potential issues, which we believe are going to occur within debt funded within the levy. Or if we want to just continue to increase our free cash amount, which is continually increasing for the past 10-15 years.
Or we can choose to not raise it.
And I still haven't figured that one out. I mean, I'd love to, get a tutorial on that. But if you don't raise it, then what happens?
You have excess levy.
So will will there be a new tax rate and a new tax amount for all the people that right now have already received the first and the second preliminary quarters? Will they
This is
receive
for
it?
next year. This is fiscal year 24.
So you're setting now, so you're in essence, you're impacting and affecting the tax rate for FY 24.
Mhm.
Right.
Potentially.
And it's the FY 24 budget.
I don't think anyone has ever presented any type of explanation of how that would work and how it would be done. Everybody wants to do it. But I have yet to hear a cogent explanation of how it would be done.
And who would get that? Is that you?
It would be whomever the committee.
No, it would be me as chair, and I think that, but I think that. So Jim, if the bottom line. You know, with the.
I don't think that the topic of reducing available revenues below what the formula currently is, which is 2.5% plus new growth plus whatever. That topic, in my opinion, should be a topic that is a meeting unto itself. It's a decision unto itself. And I think if we start getting involved in that discussion within the discussion of a future operating budget, I'm not sure it's being given the proper time and consideration. I mean, that's a major change since 1982, when Proposition 2.5 was put in place. This town and most municipalities within the 351 cities and towns have increased their tax base at 2.5% plus new growth and whatever the case may be. I'm not suggesting that that is the correct methodology. I am suggesting that for almost 50 years, that's how it's been done. So if that's the desire, which I'm happy to have the discussion, I just think it should be a discussion that we have separate and apart from the impact on one particular operating budget.
So, Mr. Chair, just, can I respond to that? So the levy limit will continue to increase 2.5% regardless of how much we raise. So if we choose to raise less next year, the limit will still go up despite us not taxing the residents as much. So in a subsequent year, we could go up farther.
Right, but that still doesn't, to me, that's still a separate discussion about whether that's something that's advantageous for the town and the taxpayers.
Question, Mr. Chair. What is the process for decision made to go up by 2.5%? If Matt, who makes, I'm not aware of having participated in that decision. So is that a select board decision or
That's my.
who makes it?
It's like, generally it's the executive, branch of government, which would be the select board. They're the ones that recommend,
But it's assumed.
But
I mean,
no,
I was there for a couple days. We never discussed it.
right, it was never
discussed.
discussed.
It was never discussed.
It was never
We
discussed.
were presented with, here is your available revenue, here it is. There's never been a discussion of whether or not we should actually
Max
do
it
that.
out.
Correct.
correct, the mechanics of it though is that the select board based upon design. That sets revenue, town meeting sets appropriation. It's the town meeting actions that actually affect what's gonna get raised, because if they appropriate it, we have to raise it. What 2.5 does is there's a ceiling.
On
that
what you
town-
can appropriate.
that
Right.
the
Right.
town meeting can't exceed, and that's
Right.
really, the check and balance that Prop 2.5 provides. Because beyond that ceiling, then you must go to the voters,
For an override.
Or another.
Right.
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
So Dave, when you look at the revenue sheet, was part of the package that we have, and it shows the different categories of revenues. And property taxes is the first one. And it says here percent change 2.75, 2.7%. Why would it be 2.7 as opposed to 2.5?
Because that's comparing what the tax levy is this year to what the forecasted tax levy is for next year. But because of the 3 million coming off the top, because of that exclusion, we're raising $3 million less. So the first $3 million in allowed to be raised within Prop 2.5 amount is level dollar. And it's only the incremental increase from new growth. So the result of So the result of, so the increase in within the levy limit, plus, new growth is really around 5%. But because of the debt exclusion dropping by 3%, the nominal increase in the tax levy is just 2.7%.
Sure, I follow. I'd almost have to see that,
Yeah.
like, written.
It's actually in.
It's
here,
in the
right?
book,
Oh.
yeah.
It's actually, I
Okay.
write out, how much is going up within the levy limit versus how much is declining from debt exclusion. But basically, you take this year and you take $3 million
Oh,
away.
okay.
You have to raise another $3 million to be taxing exactly the same amount next year.
So the property tax line includes the debt excluded
Yes,
revenues as well.
it's
Okay,
tax levy.
okay.
It's what the
Okay.
taxpayers of Needham are gonna.
So,
pay.
and the 2.5% is really not, is that,
Well, 2.5 is the amount that the levy ceiling can grow without voter approval.
right?
In any year.
And let me ask this way, if the excluded revenue was flat,
Yeah.
then the increment would just be,
But the increase would have been closer to 4%.
okay, that helps explain it.
And that would be driven by new growth.
Yes, it's the new work.
2.5 plus 1.5 of new growth, so.
So the question then becomes, if on the reserve fund, to leave it at the formulaic amount minus the 3,000 to account for the two items in the operating budget. Or to level fund it from last year's amount of 2 million. And if it's level funded, whether to take those, that I'll just use $300,000 as a number. To have it be a discussion for a warrant article to go into this debt stabilization fund. Or to just decide that it, or to have the effect of that being that 300,000 less would be raised to the tax levy.
Or it could go to another stabilization
Or it
fund
could
or
go to-
another,
Or
yeah,
OPEB.
or
Or
whatever,
to
yeah.
Chair,
Yep.
two observations on it. One, if we level fund, remember last year, because of a motion on the floor, we reduced the reserve fund by 25,000. Arguably, if we're gonna level fund it, could or could not include the 25. Secondly, it seems to me that since we're going away from the formula, why don't we just go to a round number? This suggests it's a precision in the reserve fund. I would suggest that if we're gonna go away from the formula, we do a flat $2 million.
What is the most we've historically used in the reserve fund? Do you have anything?
What was the highest year? These, didn't you have a spreadsheet on that? On
What the high-
the
Well,
reserve
so
fund use?
Why don't we ask it a different
use?
way?
Yeah,
What is the least amount of reserve fund turn back we've had? Because,
Either way.
yes,
it's the same
because
number.
it's a question,
Right.
are we risking running out of the reserve
Correct.
fund capacity?
Correct.
The last 3 years has not been an issue, partly because the winters haven't been
Right.
as bad and.
But if you go back to, what was it?
2015.
Yeah,
Bad.
back to
15, yeah,
20, well, not even
1.3
just snow, but there were greater demands. For instance, we regularly had
Waste
reserve fund transfers
That's
for legal
really good.
services
Yeah,
in past years. And actually
No totals.
in public safety because of overtime, but that has not been an issue for the last 5 years.
right. I mean, that's probably a number we should, before we make any decisions, just understand.
Okay, so I'll just, so in fiscal year, so far this year, in fiscal year 23, there's been nothing. No reserves on fund transfers. In 2022, fiscal year 22, there were about 700,000. In 21, 400,000, and these are transfers out. 20, 30,000. Fiscal year 19, 307,000. Fiscal year 2018. Or 950,000. 17. About 800,000. 16. 500,000, and then the big one was 15.
Mm.
Where it was over 2 million. I'm sorry, no, it wasn't, close to 2 million. So, I mean, the track record is certainly, it's been under 1 million.
But that 1 year.
Exactly, pretty consistently. And so it seems that, you know, there's it's certainly something worth considering. I guess the question is, we're on the budget tonight. Do we want to, and it's kind of hard to separate something out. We need to take action on this line item. And then what we do with the money,
Yeah.
we can decide at a later or different date.
I would hesitate to make any firm decisions about drastically reducing this amount. I know that perhaps you only use it 1 out of 5 years, or 1 out of 6 years. But that's the whole purpose of of this fund. The whole purpose is that you don't expect it to happen every year. You want it to be there in the event there's a problem. So, you know, out of a how many $1 million budget, to be able to have a safety net aside to take care of these issues. I think that's worthy of consideration. I'd also say that, you know, over the last 10, 15 years, the whole budgeting process to some extent has changed with respect to the reserve fund. And I've heard conversations from our committee on numerous occasions over the past 2 to 3 years where they've said, if you need the money, come to the reserve fund. They don't want to do that. We've encouraged them to, they want it to be in their budget.
Right.
So they don't have to come to the reserve fund. They don't have to come to the finance committee to have a discussion about whether or not this additional expenditure is fair and reasonable. And my concern would be, the more you take away from the reserve fund, I would suggest there might be a greater argument then for people to say, you're not gonna have the money, so I gotta put it in my operating budget. So I understand there are competing interests here. I'm sure there's a number somewhere we can agree that's, you know, somewhere in the middle. But I think we need a little more discussion.
Mr. Chair, can I ask how the formula is used to calculate the amount of reserve funds? Does it take into account just the size of the overall operating budget, or also historical usages?
No,
It has nothing to do with historical.
it's just a percentage of the.
Of the operating budget, and there was a formula I had suggested, which finance committee incorporated into its process a number of years ago, and I based that going back to the mid-90s, that it was about 1.2, 1.3% a year. So the committee's been doing it thick and thin, many changes in the operation of town, the type of town and stuff, and it's been at that same level.
Kind of interesting that we seem to be the one body in the town that is willing to have some fiscal discipline to reduce something.
So Jim, do you consider a 2.3 million to 2 million to be a drastic reduction in the?
No.
spending? So I think what we're thinking, in the round number, I think is a good way to do it, is have it be at $2 million.
I have no objection.
Does anyone have an objection to that? Okay, so why don't we'll have the,
Does that carry forth just for this time, or do you need to change your formula going forward?
no,
No,
it'll be
As long as
this year.
it's just a guideline, it's
Right.
not, it's not.
We could we could allocate whatever we want to it. I mean, if we're committed.
Okay, so, then we'll turn to the departments. The first one is, select board town manager.
Excuse myself.
Joshua. Any discussion on that?
The other sheet breaks it down into expenses and salaries of people.
Well, I guess this does require discussion, are we gonna put that position within the budget or not? So. I'm still not convinced. Of the drastic need for the position, especially beyond. The pandemic. But. If there's no will to potentially stop the position. At some point. I suppose. it Doesn't make any sense to keep on excluding it from the budget.
I think there are two questions. One. Is the position necessary? Two, are we paying more for the position than it's worth? I think the second question is pretty clear. That's what the going rate would be for the position. So I don't think there's an issue about. The level of compensation that boils down to the appropriateness of the position, and I think. It's clear that the executive branch feels very strongly that it is required, and I don't have the basis for second guessing on that one.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I also think this is a hard one to put the genie back in the bottle. I
Yeah.
think that it's been proven that there's things that, there's information that's available now that was never available before this person came on board. I think it's shown in different ways that the website's improved and other types of things. People want information electronically much more than they ever have before, and this position's allow that to, I think, take some good strides. So
And it's taken the burden off a lot of people to do things that, is kind of. A nuisance, I guess, or just time consuming part of their job and not what they really want to be doing.
And I think if you look at a lot of organizations across the board, whether it's private sector ones or others. These types of roles exist and play a purpose, and so I believe it should be in the operating budget.
I
would agree with that.
Louise?
So the one thing I would note overall is that, and I'm gonna go back to my tax levy and increasing taxes discussion. Every department is recommended to be funded not just at the level at which they say they need to increase their budget to provide the level of services that we have, but at an increased level. And so to me, it's one of those instances where we have extra money coming in and we're trying to figure out how are we gonna allocate this pot that comes out to be, how much does it come out to be? 800, I don't know how much it comes out to be. But anyway, it's like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra money that we're just trying to figure out how to spend.
Well, this is money that was has been spent in past budgets. It was just spent as a warrant article.
But
on
not
this
necessarily
particular-
from the levy. We have all of this money, if we use one-time funding for a position, it is not in the levy. But if we continue to increase the levy, we now have all of this excess money that, in my view, I think we're actually trying to figure out how do we spend?
It was funded. in the
This
levy,
excess money.
Even as a warrant article, it was funded in the levy.
So I'd have to look that one up, whether last year it was funded within the levy, but not all warrant articles are funded
No, I know.
within the levy. So again, so I know we want to have that discussion some other time. But I do think that we're not as prudent with the dollars, because we have so many dollars that are just automatically coming in.
I'm not sure I understand your point, your point, Louise, that we're not squeezing anybody on the
And we don't,
basic
not only
request,
do we
we're
know,
only squeezing the DSL folks.
right,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're doing,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we did the experiment. We didn't do it this budget season. We're, going to a couple of the departments and trying to do a zero-based, that's what are your services and how many people would you need to deliver that service? At least in the two departments we did last year,
Mhm.
it appeared there wasn't. I mean, the nature of the services that get provided here, it's 90% labor that if you can do more with, had to do more with, or the same amount with less bodies. At least, haven't spent a lot of time with everybody trying to figure that out.
No, but
I guess part of the frustration though, and I think this is maybe what Louise is echoing, is that I feel like we have increasingly seen a statement from, Department X that, oh, we use this experiment to fund Y because we actually didn't hire that person. So we had extra money in our budget. So,
And then it ends up rolling in, and then it rolls in and grows and becomes a DSR four, so. Anyway, so. But I don't think we can roll back
This we get there.
this particular position.
I share Louise's point, particularly with respect to the DPW. But I'm gonna, because I think as we looked at that, I personally am not comfortable that we've dug as deep as we need to. On the other hand, I don't see that we can realistically between
Mhm.
now and when we have to come up with a budget. I think that's a summer project in which we look at the in-source versus outsource and the level of service issues, both of which could drive hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I don't
In
see us,
both directions.
I don't see us, able
Yeah.
to do that now. So I suggest that that's a subject we need to dig into, but I don't see it for this particular budget process.
I don't believe we need 351 PIOs. I don't. I don't buy it. I think it's flavor of the day. And I just don't agree with it. And I will tell you one other thing.
This position per
That
se,
if the Board of Selectmen-
Sorry,
Select board want to advocate for increasing their overall budget, which is what they're doing. I think we need to also consider the fact that they have a DSR 5 for another $340,000. And I think at some point we need to take a hard look at that. In other words, what is their real priority? If their priority is to put this position now as a full-time position with the operating budget, fine. Then don't tell me your priority is to have this fellow come and or the 2 additional DSR 5s for payroll and recruitment activities. So I'm not a happy camper on this. Not that I have to be. But if this is their priority, fine.
Well, I haven't seen or witnessed anything to the contrary myself, that it's not, and I also think that, it's been this position's been here for 3 years, if not 4, at least 3. And I think we had always said we wanted to see how we kept it outside the budget to see how it went, and I think it's hard to argue that the services that are being provided through this person, I think, are ones that are well received and we didn't have before.
Did anyone at this table who was then there at the time believe that once they approved this even outside the budget, that someday someone was going to come back and say, you're right, we don't need this position?
No,
No.
Okay, well, that's good. All right. So at least we're being intellectually honest, which is nice. No further comment.
all right, we will go forward with that. Town clerk. Legal. Finance Department. Finance Committee. Planning and Community Development. I will speak to this one and to the DSR 4 as I've done some investigating and discussions with people on it. My initial reaction, as people know, this position of the community housing specialist has been in place since the early 2010s. And it's been funded historically with half the position being paid through the operating budget and the other half being paid from CPC funds. And there was an allocation in fiscal year 2013 of $60,000 to cover a couple of years from the CPC for this fund. And then there was a subsequent one done in 2017 of $70,000 to continue on. that fund is now coming to an end, and so this would be the time to sort of renew it through CPC if that's what's gonna be done according to past practices. In the interim, this is kind of, it's an interesting statute in that there's no regulations, there's no CMR regulations regulating how it's spent. And, it's, when I talked to Peter Pignator about it, who's the chair of the CPC, he said, he kind of used the terms like the Wild West. Different towns are doing different things with how the CPC funds are being spent, and they're allowed to do that, or they can do that because there aren't any hard regulations that you can go to. In 2019, the DOR, issued, a set of guidelines. They're not regulations, they're guidelines, but they do come from the DOR. And they're pretty extensive, talking about the Community Preservation Fund and, how it's to be processed, all its administrative requirements, and then a section on what it can be spent on. And there's some examples given in here, and I read through them, as did town council. Town council in the fall opined that, in his opinion, under these guidelines as they're currently written by the DOR, that CPC funds cannot be spent on a town employee, even though that person is working to support community housing. And the CPC, through Peter Pignator, who I spoke with, is deferring to town council on that. I think you could argue that maybe town council, you could take another position on his interpretation, because I don't think it's quite as clear cut in the guidelines as he might say that it is. But the CPC, there's not a CPC article to appropriate it, and so it's either if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen here in the operating budget or not happen at all. And so I was sort of went into this with a position saying, well, why should these 28.5 come from the operating budget when it's available through other tax money that we're all paying in the CPC? But the opinion of town council and the position of the CPC is that it's no longer available through there, and therefore, if it's to continue to be funded, it needs to come through the operating budget. So that's a long-winded explanation of it, that I'm not sure, even though we might not necessarily agree, I'm not quite sure it's something that's worth fighting about.
Well, certainly Peter Pignator isn't gonna fight about it,
No, he's not gonna fight about it.
Sometimes, John, often depends how you ask the question. And that if the question were asked, would it violate the CPC laws if we had it paid by the CPC? Where it's close, how you ask the question can determine the answer. And did we ask, was the question asked the right way or the wrong way?
So I think it's strictly a matter of I don't read the guidelines that say it can't be done.
Yeah.
And if you just look at the statute says CPC funds can be spent on something that's in support of affordable housing. And if you look at the job description of the person who currently does this job, everything that she does is about affordable housing, supporting it, promoting it, trying to get more of it, helping with the administration of it, et cetera. So it's not like what she's doing is also having to do with housing that's outside of affordable. It's all affordable.
So what I'm suggesting is that if you ask town council, is it would this be a violation? In your opinion, I think he would say, no, it's not clear that it would be a violation.
As we do it, right?
Yeah.
As we do it, correct. I agree.
Is there something in the budget that could be funded appropriately with the CPC funds that would then free up other money to fund this instead?
It's too late in the process.
Okay.
Or the other way around? Is this more money being given to the CPC by this, so they can fund more projects?
It is, but it's too late in the process to file an application.
Well, they're not gonna have enough.
They were due-
According to Peter, they don't have enough. They're gonna have more money than people have asked for.
Sorry.
They're gonna, yeah.
Boy, that sounds like the town. Give it all away, John.
It's not, it's over, and in CPC, there's gonna be more money available than people have requested grants for this year. So,
Okay, I guess.
there's no question it can come from there, that there's funds there for it to happen. The
Okay,
question is whether or not it's, you know, we would run the risk. Now, is DOR ever gonna audit us? I would, over
That being
28
said,
over this.
Having.
Yeah, but
said-
they'll only then issue a legal opinion if it
I wouldn't
wasn't
put that in the
allowed.
minutes.
Yeah. Having said what I said, I think unless we specifically asked the question and got, I think it's tough for us to go against
Mhm.
what the town council's on record with.
We can't.
So we can't anyway,
Yeah, we can't.
so.
So I just wanted to give that was my investigation of it, just because it sort of caught me and I was, just didn't understand and why, if it was available there, why it needed all of a sudden to come from the operating budget.
And for this position, was the CPC contributing to some of the group health insurance? Workers'
No.
compensation?
No, I don't think any of that, no.
That's clearly not allowed in the law.
Okay, so we'll add the 28.5 and. So it'll be 613,707. Police department,
So, Mr. Chair, on this one, I would actually like to propose that we fund them by providing an additional $45,000 for, the social worker that contract that they have. They explained that due to the timing of when the contract started and when the budget was due, they didn't have information at the time they submitted the budget about how that split would work with Dedham. And the police chief was pretty clear, both that it was helpful, successful, and that the split was not occurring as they had initially envisioned it in terms of the services that were being provided. So that was a discussion, and I would prefer that it go to that than the debt service stabilization fund.
No, if Riverside has a person.
They do.
full-time that we can
They do.
use.
And so happy to go back to the police chief and talk to him if the committee thinks that that would be appropriate, if you think that that's something that we want to recommend. And I think he said that in this meeting too, not just at the liaison. meeting.
and I'm just trying to read it. I'm not saying that 45,000 is an unround number, but it's also a round number.
No, it was a
What
round
is-
number because that's what was in the budget last year. It was $45,000. So this would just double the number of hours that are available to them. It is a completely round number.
Discussion?
I thought last year or the year before, whenever we first discussed this, it was. I thought at that time, as important. An increase as the town was considering for anything else. We've heard of all of the stories with respect to, social upheaval. Not just from COVID, but just also from. Not being able to be in person for a lot of classroom instruction and a lot of other activities. And so if the town is serious about trying to address some of those issues, this is an opportunity to do it. Whenever we discussed this last, I actually was more interested in, and I know this will probably have some shrieks and boos, but putting this in the operating budget. I thought to me, that's how important this was. So, I think it is very important and I would support Louise's suggestion.
This is in the operating budget, isn't it?
It,
Yep.
The half,
it's,
The
the
half
half
of it
is
is
in,
in,
the half
And,
is,
yeah, and
Right.
this would
provide us with, yeah, the
Yeah.
equivalent of a full-time person from Riverside.
But that, it's an expense item, right?
It's an
not a-
expense, it's a contract. we would, it's not someone we would hire. That was a whole, that was also part of the discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a contract that, not necessarily may not be renewed.
Right.
My own view was, and again, I'm not
Yeah.
arguing for this, that if this is a service that we really believe our town should be providing, then it shouldn't necessarily be a contract. Now, on the other hand,
There was a reason. for that.
if there are people
Yeah.
that are more qualified to handle this, but then we heard the story of, at 11 o'clock at night,
Mhm.
is there someone who's answering the phone? And I'm not suggesting anyone's not answering the phone, but the suggestion was maybe they're not answering as quickly.
Mhm.
And so these visits were good when you could set them up in advance and have advance notice and make sure there was people there to staff it. But when you have these kind of emergent situations, those were still pretty much
Mhm.
not necessarily being handled. But I don't want to dig any more deeper into anything else. I agree with the suggestion. How about other people?
Well, but I do think there was a reason for that, not being a town employee, was for certain privacy and other connections, that this employee, being a Riverside person, would be able to get access to certain records and other things that would enhance their performance in their position. So that was something that the chief definitely mentioned too, which kind of speaks to that issue.
Otherwise, anyone? Objection? Okay, so we'll, add $45,000 there on the police budget. You have to leave for fire? Any discussion on the fire budget?
Come on back.
Every fireman, we just added $100,000. They all get to go on vacation. They're going to Cancun.
Only if they take care of their mother.
Yeah, only if they take their mother, they can get a Cancun. Well, we got no collusion there. Building department. Minuteman, we actually have an updated assessment and it's almost $1,500 less than what they had told us before. So the adjusted or modified amount is $1,640,461. And that includes both the capital assessment that we pay for the new building that was constructed there, and also for the tuitions of our students who go there. Needham Public Schools.
By the way, did you see the article regarding?
Admissions.
Yeah, it's really though, it's targeted to the ones that are in the inner cities or around the urban areas. It doesn't,
But,
my
but the-
understanding that Minuteman is not,
Minuteman was not excluded. There was like only one school that they mentioned that didn't admit based purely on lottery system. Only one school used lottery system, I guess.
Minuteman uses a lottery, but there's some behavioral qualifications apparently that they use.
I just thought it was.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't singled out,
Right.
obviously, but they weren't the exception either.
Needham Public Schools.
I want to just summarize some of the questions that I had related to the school, so. I was talking about the funding source, so like other departments, the health department, the library, they receive funds other than the tax levy, they get funds from the state. And since COVID over the past few years, understandably, they were kind of reserving that funds because they didn't know how, if they were going to need it or not. And so now they have more funds than they typically would otherwise just held, basically from the circuit breaker funds from the state. I get the impression that they want to spend that down. They want to use up that money. I think that they can, but I don't know if they can do that all in 1 year. So I wonder if they can rely upon some of that funds rather than raising as much from the tax levy.
But those funds have to be spent in a specific way.
Right, exactly. So in particular, their out of district tuition requests, that's going up a lot, and they can be used to spend out of district tuition. So the school department is planning to use some of the fiscal 23 circuit breaker funds, they're carried over from last year, as well as fiscal year 24 circuit breaker funds. Their net requests for additional funds from the tax levy for other district tuition is $194,963. Those are also eligible for circuit breaker. I wonder whether that amount of money would be available from the circuit breaker funds rather than from the tax levy.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, the circuit breaker funds are not COVID related. I thought that's what you were talking about, sorry.
No, but they were. But the explanation that we received is that they weren't expended as anticipated because they received COVID grants instead, and they were holding them in case there were extra needs.
And then next year, we would have a very high jump in circuit breaker.
Next year, the assumption is that there'll be a 70% reimbursement. Historically, it's been 75 for a long time. So at 70% would be 3.15 million. At 75% it would be an additional 225,000.
I remember the days of not being sure we were gonna get 70.
Right, exactly. You never knew.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's just walk through it. So let's just use the number, the 194,000 that they're seeking is that's included within the 92 million, right? You're saying that 194 is available to them. They have it today.
So there is some unknowns, and they don't exactly know how much they're going to use of the circuit breaker funds, but based on historical practice, there have been at least 1.5 million each year that's been unused and carried over to the next year.
Which is why we have never entertained their request for a yeah, a stabilization fund.
Right.
For special ed, because they have this
Right.
money there. Which they basically carry over.
Yeah, I want to be clear, this is just about funding sources. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that they will have the money to do all of the operations.
And still leave them with the 1.5 million in reserve, basically. Basically,
Well-
we've allowed them this $1.5 million
Right.
reserve fund for
Essentially.
special ed. Essentially, that's what we've been doing. And it
But-
carries
I
forward
mean,
year to
they're
year.
in there, not. And somewhat in there, but they don't really know.
They
what-
don't.
what
That's
they- I
absolutely
mean,
correct.
This is a guesstimate and, you know, until they know who, you know, who's gonna be eligible and. And therefore having cushion is important, because it really is. Unknown.
And plus there's now a new administration, so.
Yeah, but that has, I mean, that doesn't
Oh.
impact what we have to spend to send kids in need to out of district. That's what this is addressing.
So I think that, I don't have any issue with the concept. I think the particular challenge this year, from what we heard in our discussions. And what I've seen otherwise, is that the out of district tuitions are going way, way up. We have no control over that. It's not something we're asking for, but to send our students there, we're gonna need to pay that price. I just wonder what with that in play this year, is, and knowing that's there, is this the year to do this? And is it maybe better to hold off for one more year to see how those increased tuitions play out? If they level off, so that doesn't occur again. And then this phenomenon, I'm not trying to use that word in a bad way, but this phenomena exists again. And we have a better handle on the tuitions, whether that would be the right time to do it. That's my reservation, Bob, just because of the tuitions are going up in all these places and they're turning to the town, cities and towns and saying, you wanna send your children here, you need to pay this, and it's a lot more than what you paid the last whole bunch of years.
The other wrinkle is the superintendent indicated that the state may reimburse cities and towns for this increase. And if that's the case, I think it would go back to free cash.
Right, it wouldn't go into their budget. So are you all right with seeing how that plays out, or do you want to propose this reduction?
No, I mean, I think we need to. I think it's just important that, to come back to the tax discussion, to not be raising more than necessary. So whether it happens this year or next year, I think it's an important thing to keep in mind.
I think it's worth conferring with the school department about this and voting it specifically next week. I'd like to get there. What I think is, what I'm hearing is, this is your analysis, but it hasn't been specifically reviewed with Ann and Dan.
We asked.
This-
it has.
This specific issue.
I've asked this question.
Josh brought it up for about
Yeah.
15-20 minutes.
Yeah.
So there's a disagreement in part. I mean, I think the school department feels that all of the funds from circuit breaker will be used and will be expended. I think that also assumes that there will be no vacancies over the course of the year, which has been a common occurrence and the reason why there's been, I think, more circuit breaker. So it's just a different analysis.
Yeah, I don't think that going back
Yeah.
again is, I mean,
Okay.
because every meeting I've been at, and I wasn't here when we presented the schools, but when we met as liaisons, you went over this every single time, and I think we kept coming back to that 194 number, saying, you know, that with the tuitions going up in a dramatic way, that they didn't feel comfortable reducing that any further.
So, no, I'm not, I don't wanna propose any change, because the school department has their own opinions about this, but I think it's important to really keep in mind to look at these sort of breakdowns and how they're being used as well.
Right, any further on Needham Public Schools?
The only thing, John, that I would mention is I did read the report. I didn't watch it, but I read the report with respect to the enrollment. I think there's a lot of give and take in that analysis, especially with respect to the 2 or 3 pages of assumptions. So similar to this discussion, you know, I'd like to have us keep an eye on that as we move forward. And what is the actual experience compared to what this prognostication is?
Well, I think that's gonna come up in 2 ways, Jim, and one is when you know, the school master plan, when they actually propose that they want to go forward with a project, and whether that's to you know, for more space and be able to justify it through this, which I don't think that justifies it for them right now. Then secondly, I think most of their increases have been, their people increases have been for services, for special education and other types of services. It's not like they're adding teachers, like, you know, adding another 5th grade teacher at X school or Y school. It's more to address the needs of special education and being able to have those students, you know, get, you know, as many and the best resources that they can.
Which are mandated
by the state.
Well, special ed and mental health as well, guidance, mental health.
But I agree with you that the argument about, well, we need to spend more, whether on the budget or on capital because of increased enrollment, is really isn't borne out by the numbers.
I don't think so. I think that requires further discussion and analysis.
Anything else on Needham schools? And we'll move forward to building design and construction.
Is the 111 not included in the last 2 columns there? Is that correct? I feel like that's different from the.
We're going with the town manager's,
So the 111 was a position, an extra new project manager they were looking for.
Right.
And the pushback we gave them is there aren't enough projects to justify having another person. There could be if some of these schools go forward, but there isn't right now.
that. Obviously, Kate concurred.
DPW,
I could repeat But I said before, I think you've got the only DSR four that is approved here is for the trailer for the RTS, which does strike me as being necessary. And I don't have a basis for quibbling with the other numbers, other than the process that I think is a longer term issue.
So with regard to the trailer, it's meant to be temporary. Would that be better as a DSR five?
It's a lease though, so it's an annual cost under the lease, I think.
But it's only meant for a couple of years, right?
Oh, I don't think so.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
a longer term thing, yeah.
And how much was it to buy a trailer and install it, a prefab building?
I don't have that information. It's, where they were looking at, we don't know what type of operation might be there in 5 years from now. And that was driving, and they thought the cost of renting over 5 years was less expensive than building something permanent. Only because of the concern that, well, why would you be building something permanent if you're not sure you're gonna have the same operation? So that's the perspective that DPW took on that.
So I'm just gonna say for $450,000 over 5 years, I think we bought the modulars at the Newman School when we redid that. That was like 20 classrooms for $4 million.
So,
Years ago?
yeah.
No,
mean,
I understand
it's
that, but
a
I'm
whole
just
different- It's a
yeah,
whole different
but-
error as far as.
modulars,
Yeah, what they cost and things along those lines.
because those were temporary modulars, like they weren't permanent.
Right.
And
they
then we sold
rolled
them.
in and.
Yeah,
rolled them out.
and then, exactly. But anyway, it just seems like a lot of money, but completely necessary because those conditions are
Horrific.
horrible. Yeah,
So Dick, when you retire from our committee, can we hire you as a consultant to study the DPW?
Yeah, I'll do it anyhow, it's a volunteer.
but there is a lot of work to be
That's
done.
what
I
you
mean,
are now. Well, like, if I was a
I think you should get paid for it.
This is a step up. And I think are they definitely gonna be going up on the rates? For the, for the
RTS
commercial rates for the,
disposal.
because I've looked at the schedule and that's a dramatic increase. So that doesn't impact the expenses, it's a revenue item, but I think we've got to insist that they do something in those rates.
It's, the information is gonna be provided to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And they will be going in as they usually do in, June in terms of any recommendations for rate increases.
I think the proposal, as I've seen it, is like a 500% increase in the rates. It's dramatic, yeah. And that would bring them on the high side, but not outside the range of what's going on in other facilities.
Yeah.
The motivation was to do that was what?
Dedham closed down his facility, so more stuff is coming in now to us, so we're processing material from, on a commercial basis from
Bigger.
Mhm.
and external sources, so. So we wanna make sure we're charging. If we're low rates and they're disproportionately gonna come to us to,
But we don't wanna go so high that
yeah.
we hurt our revenue.
Correct, and they're looking at that in terms of the cost, but we also have to remember is those rates, granted, the market's finally caught up. Our rates were higher than some of the surrounding communities, but the rate was also higher because basically it's been providing a subsidy to the people who use the pay to throw that. And such, and there can be an argument that you can't just excessively expect one group of people to pay for everything other. There's still that Sudbury decision out there. I'm sorry, the Emerson case.
We are allowed to make that argument, really? Excellent.
We do with our tax rates, we max that differential out.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, one would argue if they're gonna be bringing in a lot more commercial dumping to the dump, it's not only affecting the dump, it's affecting the roads with the bigger trucks that are coming through, rambling through town and all that, so the extra fees would
Yeah. and-
help to
Already
defray.
driving through the
Well,
town.
true, but
and
still,
clearly, but, you know, it's not just the cost of hauling it away, it's gone up dramatically, so.
And that's the analysis is in terms of that if we were actually losing money,
Mhm.
and I think at the 140, we probably are. And still be an increase, like 5 times the amount, I think. will be
Well, I just
very,
thought,
very hard.
that was what I saw as being proposed. So I'm encouraging him to,
But
move
back
on
to your
it.
basic question, yes, that is gonna be looked at this spring.
well, and if we take away those yellow bag subsidies, then people are just gonna stuff their trash in the trash cans at the parks. And that, we'll have to get another gentleman to go around to all the parks to take
Person.
everybody's trash.
person,
Person.
not just.
That's right, I'm sorry, the person.
Right.
But I mean, isn't that kind of what like ends up, then it's becomes this,
Yeah.
It's just cycle.
yeah.
Okay, municipal parking? Health and human resources, health and humans, health and human services, I apologize.
So it looks like the only thing that's,
We're adding the 40,000 for the
Okay,
traveling
yes.
meals, and then the other items are. We're gonna be continuing funded through grants, but will
Right.
most likely be at us next year to come into the operating budget.
and just so, we just reiterate, that 40,000 is a true guesstimate.
Mhm.
We have no idea, they have no idea what it's gonna cost, or even if
They haven't sourced they don't have a source.
they can't find a source. They haven't found a source yet.
And I just additional information, the revolving fund spending limit will also be increased, as we know, the cost is going up. This is trying to offset some of the anticipated increase
Correct.
in the cost.
I think it's regrettable that this. There are certain items. Within the Health and Human Services budget. And in their mission. That, at least in my view. Are a state issue, if not a national issue.
Right.
And the fact that. Every city and town is trying to grapple with these same issues. Which is to provide. Basic, human, decent. Services from a meal perspective or a mental health perspective. To me, that's. Absurd. It should clearly be done on a much more of a global level. And, you know, if the state really wants to help that constituency, which they say they do. That's where these programs should be driven. It doesn't need to be done at every city and town, and if there was. A more global effort, just within the Commonwealth. Now, everything may not be exactly the way you wanted it, because, you know, if it's gonna be done statewide, you know, maybe the meals don't have to be frozen, but. It may not be exactly what we do now. But that's really what should be happening here, and for all of our respective finance committees and warrant committees that are out there. Grappling with this, we know that we're gonna have an increased need for these services, we know it. And yet, you know, that's, if you wanna know where your tax dollars should be going, it should be going to those people that can't help themselves. And this is a population that can't help themselves, so I support this very much so. But I think as John had mentioned, and Carol, I think, mentioned also during the hearing, you know, it would be great if we could get some support from our legislators. Because I really believe that's where the momentum should be. I actually even asked at the medical school where I work, we do a lot of healthcare consulting and healthcare services. And I've actually thrown that into their business group saying, you know, this is something that's out there, you know, come up with a program to help the cities and towns of Massachusetts. And they're looking at it, but it really is something that, you know, should be done on much more than a local level.
Can I ask a question? Like, whose responsibility is it at like a department level to kind of lobby the state legislators or anybody to kind of advocate for state programs like this? Like, who would go to?
Well, there's a board of health,
The Senate.
they're elected. There's a board of health that could do it, our select board can do it. I mean,
We have a representative that lives in the town too.
Yeah, and there's there's.
Well, but that's what
plenty
I mean, like,
yeah.
whose kind of responsibilities is it to bring these things to the other elected members who could actually affect and bring this to the
Well, I think
state
John said that
legislature.
to Tim, is that,
Yeah.
yeah, John mentioned that. you
Yeah.
know, Are we gonna continue to advocate and to push? But I think the select board should also, that should be one of their priorities. But I support it.
I think it's in our representative doing her state of the. State of the state
I got my
address to it,
letter.
yeah, on Monday. It's a good point.
Commission on Disabilities. Historical Commission. Library, it was pointed out in the, basically through the math that, the salaries were understated by 4,600. And so and that was really just someone missed that in their computations. So, that is why it's reflected in the time, it wasn't even caught at the time of the town manager's, proposed budget, but we now have the information now and it's been confirmed, so we've added that here to make it 2,235,734.
Okay, so, but this sheet is the wrong number.
That sheet is right.
Right,
This is just a guide sheet.
Yeah.
It's not.
yeah, this is the town manager.
The right
was
number is,
not correct.
the right number is
Right,
2,235,734. Park and Recreation. Memorial Park. Council for Arts.
Sorry, can I go back to this? Did this include the extra 25,000 that was
Yeah.
from last year?
It's in their, it was in their budget last year.
So Louise, I think on these items then, the 1,148,054,653 would be added, or we would add 45,000 to that. To reflect the police,
Oh, to the bottom line,
the
right.
bottom line, I was thinking the bottom line.
But we're making the reserve fund an even 2 million.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go back to that page in a
Okay.
second, but just to finish this page. I think we. Have it all set, except that bottom line number, the 148,054,653 needs to be increased by 45,000.
Okay,
That makes sense? Yeah. All right, so going back to the previous sheet, then, the ones that we left uncounted was. Group health insurance benefits. 17,599,022 reflects. What we voted on in the departments. We're ready to close that?
So in terms of personnel. Which is why we kept those open. I don't think we have anything outstanding, right? We have agreed with the PIO.
What was in there was actually the extending the hours on the. What was that position and
I don't think that had any,
No.
$20.
oh,
Well,
and then
I'll
the school
contribute that.
department.
And then the others
People.
are school department.
School department. So it's the PIO position and then the school department added FTEs.
So given that we've agreed on that now, then I agree with you,
Yeah.
John.
That's right. That's right. They bring closer to.
Yep.
To group health insurance benefits. OPEB. And workers' comp.
Correct.
Yep.
And then we've agreed to have the, reserve fund be at 2 million. So I think. Then that will end up with about 300,000, which we can discuss about. Even netting out the 45 for the police, not tonight, but what we want to do about that. But we can decide that, we will decide that at a later date.
Okay.
So can you do the math, Louise, and then we can vote on,
You want it right now?
recommended budget, if is that possible?
Yeah.
That way we don't
We gotta-
meet next week.
So we could do that without allocating the other.
Yeah.
240, vote the budget.
You don't, So you could choose to only allocate half of the budget, like to vote something that's half of what the revenue sheet said.
Okay.
There's no requirement that we vote all of that money. Or
You can
recommend.
recommend a budget of $1.
What?
You could recommend a budget of $1.
Too much.
No, you still actually do want to have $1. So you maintain a budget.
Yes, Dave, do you have any preliminary idea of how the free cash is proposed to be used on the budget?
Yes, it's the. I believe, I'll email you that number.
Of the free cash for the operating. Total free cash is?
15?
That's the estimate that I'm using, they haven't been certified yet.
You want the total bottom line?
Yes, please.
205,000,570,925.
Say that again?
That's
not right.
It's gotta be 214 and something.
No, probably.
No, where's the right?
All right, let's start on what's,
Well, we went down 300,000 on
Yeah,
reserve, right?
probably 213.
We added
7,
45
213.
for some other thing. So it should probably be around what, around 200, 190?
Oh,
No.
here's my problem. Police, I made 45 instead of adding 45.
45 million, did you?
214.
No,
Yeah,
$45.
well,
no, I made 45,000 instead of
minus 300,
X plus
So it's a
45,000.
214.
yeah,
Nah.
right.
Well, I didn't, but there it goes.
And then adding the
What is the total?
No,
45.
I'm sorry.
It's only millions, don't worry.
You,
it's-
it looks like you were reading the fiscal year 23 budget minus 300 instead of the
Oh, no.
24.
It was, I referred to a wrong box.
Yeah.
All right, 214,000. I mean, million. 275,087.
Okay.
Roughly $300,000 worth.
Yeah. So it should be.
Mhm.
Sorry about that.
okay, so, what I'd like to see then is a motion for the finance committee to recommend, a budget, recommend the total budget amount of 214,275,087.
So move.
Second,
Any discussion? We'll come to a vote, Jim?
yes.
Dick?
Yes,
Louise?
Yes.
Yes. Carol?
Yeah.
Carla?
Yes.
And Barry?
Yes.
Yes.
The chair votes yes, so that's unanimous. We have that done,
You will draft the letter.
so I'll get to work on all the stuff we have to do.
Yep.
I'm fine.
So I think based on this, we won't be meeting the next 2 Wednesdays. And I'll let you know if we need to meet the 28th. Or we'll just go into the first Wednesday in March, but we'll let you guys know that. Any questions? Anything we're missing, Dave? You gonna be okay next Wednesday night with us?
Withdrawal.
So when will we get our first draft warrant?
Next week,
Yeah, and it's-
end of this week, Friday.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I'm thinking if we do have that, that maybe we could start at the end of February, because we always seem to get crunched in April without enough time. For some of the warrant articles, so, we'll go over that.
Yeah, we'll see what's ready.
except the reason we don't have enough time is we haven't got the information in.
Right.
Right,
The moving
exactly.
parties.
Any updates people have? I'll just give you one from, I've been sitting on the, active recreation activities working group.
Oh, wow.
With persons from the, Park and Rec Commission, Katie King, Assistant Town Manager, Susan Welby and a few others. And so far, what they've really been doing is soliciting what people are looking for. And, there was 3 things, 2 of which are getting huge drumbeats and 1 a lesser drumbeat. One is pickleball courts, and they're resounding, there aren't enough, there need to be 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 pickleball courts that need it. Now, of course, we have to find out where they would go and who would pay for them and how we pay for them. But a huge push on that. And then the other big push, and I don't understand how it falls under this, but, for off-leash dog, opportunities. And, I'm wanting that to be part of what this group is gonna be doing, and there's gonna be a consultant hired, and apparently people want that to be studied, and then the last one is an action park for bikes and
Skateboards.
skateboards and things like that. So coming attractions.
Isn't that what the
But the
steps-
dog one completely blew me away, completely, it's just,
I mean,
Well,
Doug,
the
you,
activity, right, would be running after your dog.
yeah. I don't quite see how, off leash. But there are some incredibly passionate people there.
Yeah.
Incredibly passionate people. And apparently the pickle is played on Millsfield tennis courts
Right.
and then at the high school courts.
yeah,
Which are, I guess, aren't in very good condition as we knew from last year.
right.
Correct.
And then Millsfield, they compete with the tennis, and that's where I learned a new term, if you have, let's say, tennis courts can be used for tennis and for pickle. And so it's called time slicing. It's like they decide who gets what, and then like the pickle is in the morning and tennis in the afternoon, and
Do they have lines on both, like the?
you play it sideways,
You
yeah.
play it
so-
sideways, so you
yeah,
can put 2 pickle, 1 on each side of the tennis.
And they're painted
Oh.
on tape or something, I think, to do it.
Motion to adjourn?
So, and nothing further?
Oh, so even though we're not meeting next week, is there another meeting about Claxton next week?
There is, that everyone got, you're.
Okay.
You can go
I think
if you
so,
want to,
5:30.
right? The Claxon meeting's on, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
but are we meet?
We're not
are
gonna
we
meet-
convening as the finance
No.
committee?
We're not gonna convene as a finance. committee. So people can attend if they want to, but obviously they don't have to. Motion to adjourn and
Second.
seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
I think you have to do your thing.
Roll call.
A roll call. Jim,
I think yes.
are you positive?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Louis?
Yes.
Good job.
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Both, chair votes yes.
Even though we're all here?
Yeah, apparently.